Welcome to the ThunderCast, your martial athletics podcast produced by the fans, for the fans, with your hosts, Russ Livingood and KD Hugnall. We're bringing you the thundering word on the thundering herd each and every week. So keep it right here. The ThunderCast is on the loose. Thanks for downloading another episode of the ThunderCast. You can follow us on Twitter at ThunderCast_pod. Of course, you can watch the show on our YouTube channel, and you can listen to the show on your favorite podcasting outlet. We are pretty much everywhere, or at least the major ones, so you shouldn't have a hard time finding us. All you got to look for is that sweet logo, the, what do you call that, Russ? Maybe a dead-eyed bison head.
I've never had to describe it other than it's freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's freaking cool as well. Okay. So the position group breakdown series continues this week. We're flipping the script back to the offensive side of the football, and we're going to talk about wide receivers and tight ends. This has got to be one of the biggest question mark units going in, at least during the course of my preparation. I had so many question marks in my head. But as I got into my preparation and started thinking about it a little more, I started feeling a little bit better. I definitely didn't feel bad anymore. Like, man, we lost a ton. We did lose a ton, but I don't feel as bad about some of the pieces we brought in, some of the high school recruits that came in. So I want to talk about all that. But before we get into any of that, I want to say once again that we are into season 5, and it's just such a great thing to be a part of the ThunderCast, man. I'm so happy. I'm so blessed that I get to do this, and you get to do this, and even our big buddy Jed gets to do this. It's just such an awesome feeling, man, because at the end of the day, we're just fans. You know, we're just fans, and we get to be the ones to talk about the herd, and people listen, and it's awesome. So thank you guys for listening every single week. Thank you for downloading us. Thank you for sharing the links to our shows with your friends and fellow herd fans to help grow that listener base of ours. It means the world to us. It really does. You know, we don't chase clicks and likes and all that kind of stuff. It's just really cool that people want to tune in and listen to our show and listen to us talk about the herd. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but if you do, I think it's another awesome opportunity to also talk about who helps us get to where we are.
Yeah, I'm just going to do that. We've been talking about since day 0 is what I like to say, and you say about our sponsor that allowed us to get started, and it's Leasure Oliver PLLC. That's 304carwreck.com is how you can find them, and it's, you know, we always say 304carwreck.com. That's because they're based in Huntington, West Virginia, but if you live in anywhere in West Virginia, Ohio, or Kentucky and have a different area code than that, you go to that area code, 681carwreck.com. It just takes you right over as a mirror to there. Any one in Kentucky, 270-502, doesn't matter, takes you right there. And those guys, and then when we brought on Jed and ignite.link, and now Layer 1 that Jed has, and Tom Scarberry with Landscaping by Hillcrest, and doing all the stuff that we do for all the tailgates and everything, and our people that are on our website. You know, 304 Car Wreck does that, and we have Dead Meat Society now that is a sponsor of ours on there. And Jed with ignite.link with all that he does with that. And then McCormick Insurance Group, who's done for the longest time on our website and also done some tailgates. We've just been extremely blessed. And that's where we're at today, being able to bring this content in thanks to all those people. But my final thing is I'm just going to play a quick word from Leasure Oliver PLLC. If you've been hurt in a wreck, call the law firm of Leasure Oliver PLLC. Find them at 304carwreck.com.
All right, Russ, let's get down to the nitty gritty and talk about another aspect of this offense this year in 2025. Let's talk about some pass catchers. We've talked a lot about the running game and how important that's going to be in the makeup of this offense and probably the overall success of the Marshall Thundering Herd football team. But you can't just abandon the pass game, man. Fans come to see the ball get chucked down the field. They love to see the excitement in big, long pass plays and just all the explosiveness that comes along with that. I mean, let's think about it. We've got a pretty good lineage of quarterbacks throwing to some pretty dynamic wide receivers. And I don't think we have to go down the list of some of the all-time greats, but this is a room that you'd like to be a part of. When you think about premier G5 rooms, position group rooms, I think this is one you'd like to be a part of if you're one of those. If you're a wide receiver, why wouldn't you want to put your name alongside of some of the greats that have played here? If you're a tight end, why wouldn't you want to put your name alongside some of the greats that have played here? So let's talk about some of the members of this 2025 wide receiver and tight end core for the Herd. Of course, it starts with the coaches. Your wide receiver is going to be coached by Chansey Stuckey, formerly of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. He was their wide receivers coach back in 22 when the Herd went up to South Bend and got a dub against the Fighting Irish, but he's kind of been all over the place in some major collegiate markets and conferences. Also spent a little bit of time, had a 4-year NFL career, did his ball playing at Clemson, which I kind of remember him playing a little bit collegiately and in the NFL. And then you switch over to the tight ends. It's Gunter Brewer, man. Like, there are on the short list of coaches that I'm excited to see back in Huntington. Gunter Brewer is, top 2. I mean, some of those never left, but back in Huntington, Gunter Brewer's right at the top of the list. He's amongst the elite minds in the receiving game in college, and he has been for a very long time. And for those that don't know, he coached some pretty good wide receivers in his previous stint at Marshall University from 1996 to 1999. I don't know if you want to get into some of those guys, but I think Coach Brewer knows a thing or two about pass catching and the offensive pass game. So let's talk about who we got returning from a year ago, because this is one right off of the bat that I think people go, yes, this is a huge piece, because it is a huge piece. And we're going to talk about none other than Toby Payne. We're going to lead the whole episode off with him. The 6'4", 232-pound redshirt junior, the absolute mismatch, the guy who said, nope, I'm staying at home when everybody else or a lot of other guys said the grass is greener somewhere else. Toby Payne didn't see it that way. And before we even mention anybody else, let's talk a little bit about Toby Payne, what he means to just this not only this football team, but also this community and this state, and what it means to local high school recruiting and what it says about Marshall football.
Yeah, so Toby Payne came here, and in that first game as a true freshman, he had that acrobatic receiving touchdown that was, I think he was like barely 18 when that game started, and just to see his growth and everything, including having to sit out a year with an injury and everything, but him being able to play meaningful minutes with his brother, and both of them being like highly touted from Polka High School, coming 45 minutes down the road, 35 minutes down the road, and getting to play here, family getting to watch them, and getting to start here at Marshall. I just think it's great. And, every one of our fans like to root for an Owen Porter, a Toby Payne, an Ethan Payne, those kids that played here locally, and they got to watch them on Friday nights, and then they get to turn around and see them not only be on a roster, not only play, but be superstars here. And I feel like Toby Payne was that burgeoning superstar, even as a underutilized tight end. He got 6 touchdown passes last year. He made a difference. He was a mismatch, like you said. So, yeah, I'm extremely, extremely happy that he came back.
Well, I think also what you get when you look at a guy like Toby Payne, and as it relates to fans in the stands, there are so many people that look at a kid like that and see a lot of themselves in a guy like that. And I'm not just talking about from a star football player standpoint. It's like, man, that guy grew up kind of close to where I'm from. And you see a little bit of yourself, and there's a little bit of nostalgia that hits you, and you start thinking about where you're from and how it was. And plus, it's also nice to see just kids from our region succeed and have a pathway, and it's just awesome. And you're right, to see the brothers Payne play together was really cool. And, we've seen that in other aspects. Other sets of brothers have played for the Herd before, and it was really cool. But you're talking about two West Virginia high school all-staters that came to Marshall and played and were impactful, and I'm not going to be shy about it. I think Toby Payne's the finest tight end in the Sun Belt Conference. I think he's a slam dunk first team all-conference tight end. He was criminally underutilized last year and still tied for the team lead with receiving touchdowns. If that doesn't tell you how impactful he can be, then I don't think you're paying attention to what he can do in a game. And that's just pass catching. We're not talking about blocking. We're not talking about any other aspect of the game. That's just pass catching. So let's move on to who else returned. Another tight end returns, Tracy Stevens, a 6'4", 245-pound red shirt sophomore. Then you get some guys that are, well, you got receivers, but you got one more tight end that's not new to the roster, but he's new to the room. And that's Sean Rouse, the 6'3", 265-pound redshirt sophomore. On the 2024 roster, he was an offensive lineman. Now he's a converted tight end. I think that is like extremely intriguing based on what this offense could be and what his role in that offense could be. The blocking has to be off the charts if you're a former offensive lineman, right? But you've also got to be able to move. And 6'3", 265, man, can't teach that.
Yeah, he dropped some weight to get down to that, so I've not seen like photos side by side to see any kind of transformation, but you have to imagine that he's probably kept up a lot of that strength, as much strength as he can, to be in that H-back / tight end, but mobile kind of guy, but also still have that power that you had as an offensive tackle or whatever to be able to block. And I get the feeling that he's going to be doing a lot more blocking than he is going to be trying to outrun linebackers down the field,
Yeah, but I think it's just an overall kind of, offensive lineman to tight end now, and we're going to see how that fits in this game. And you talk about changing the way your body looks, and I'm going to harken back to when we did the coaches episode, and you point directly at a guy by the name of Dwight Galt and what he can do with him in a strength and conditioning scenario. And that's a massive body change to go from an offensive lineman to a tight end, and what all that's going to mean in a very up-tempo style offense. Let's move on to one other prospect. Well, no, this is the first of three wide receiver prospects that are on the roster from a year ago that hold over this year. It's Justin Haggerty, 5'9", 169-pound redshirt sophomore. KJ Jones, the 5'11", 184-pound redshirt sophomore. And then really the lone wide receiver remaining with a reception, and that's Brian Robinson, 6'1", 200-pounder. He's a redshirt senior now. He's been with us for a number of years. Way back when he was a Florida State transfer. We've been waiting for Brian Robinson for it all to click finally, and this is the final year that he has an opportunity to do that. He's a redshirt senior. He's seasoned. He's been in the game long enough. Is this the year that it finally all comes together for Brian, and he's able to achieve the potential that we've seen in flashes? An intriguing question to ask out of this room in 2025. Only one guy that I could find exhausted eligibility from a year ago, and that is DeMarcus Harris. Then we move into the portal out, and this is where a lot of fans are going to go, oh, God, we got to relive this. Yeah, it kind of hurts because there was some production there, a good bit of production. And there were some guys that we thought might stick with us because, they had been fan favorites, and we rooted for them, and we just liked what they were all about, and they just moved on, and it is what it is. So let's start. Portal out. Chuck Montgomery, Thomas McCoy. From the tight end spot, Cade Conley, Antoine Mays, Marcel Williams, Elijah Metcalf, Braylon Brown, Tyshawn Chapman, Carl Chester, another tight end, Justin Holmes, Case Reed, Brock Montgomery, last tight end Aiden Steinfeld, and then the big one that everybody thought might come back after getting that year of eligibility, Christian Fitzpatrick. But instead, he hits the portal and lands at Oklahoma State. A lot of production gone from the wide receiver room. Not a whole lot gone from the tight end side of things, but a whole lot gone from the wide receiver room. Russ, how you feeling about what we lost in the portal out before we talk portal in?
Well, we're only returning 8 receptions for 82 yards from the receivers, plus what Toby Payne did. And, you know, again, Toby Payne, I just feel like was underutilized for the talents that he has. So what we have returning doesn't seem like a lot, even though we're bringing back Toby Payne and 6 touchdowns. Where we think about it, all that we lost was a who's who of there's a guy going to step up in the wide receiver room this week. And that's all it was last week or last year. Man, I'm getting them flipped. But you know what I mean? Like Christian Fitzpatrick has the big game. And then the very next week, it's Elijah Metcalf. And then the very next week, Chuck Montgomery breaks out. And then Tyshawn Chapman at the end of the year. And, you know, it's like, who was going to be the guy because we had such a deep room and they're all gone. So when you first look at it, you're like, man, we lost a lot. But if you remember, a lot of those guys were brought in last year for the air raid offense and everything. So they were here 1 year, and you start thinking, you know, about those individual numbers. None of them really blew you away because of there wasn't one guy that was the man week in, week out. So you start looking at what we brought in. There's a decent chance we can replace all this.
Well, I think there's more than a decent chance, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. But I think one of the things that leaps off the page to me is what you lose is it felt like Fitzpatrick was good for that eye-popping highlight catch every year, every game, which was a crowd igniter. So even when there was a lull in the action and it wasn't going and stuff just kind of got stale, well, here comes Fitz with an acrobatic catch, and that really ignites the crowd. And there were some guys that we just cut short and didn't get to see. You know, Metcalf got hurt, and we didn't get to see much of him. Cade Conley was a known entity 2 seasons ago, and then last year basically not used. He may have been injured. I can't really recall, but so you know if I had to pick a guy that I hated to see go the most, it was Chuck Montgomery. I would have loved to see Chuck finish his career here. I get it. You know, there's a lot of loyalty there between those guys and the former coaching staff, and they chose to remain loyal to the coaches rather than, you know, the school. And we see that a lot this year, not just this year, but in this era. And that's unfortunate, you know, because we as fans are ever loyal to the herd. And we obviously expect every player to be as loyal as we are to the herd. And we just, even though we know that's not the reality, it doesn't make it sting any less when there's guys that we really like and we really truly root for, not just on a football field, but they just don't feel the same passion about our team as we do. I mean, even though I know it's going to happen, it still sucks. But let's move and flip and talk about who we brought in the portal, because it might not be as bad as some people might be thinking. Let's start with Jacoby Baldwin, a very interesting prospect from NC State because he was listed really on both sides of the ball, but on the Herd Zone roster, he's listed as a wide receiver. So we're going to go with that. The 6', 200-pound NC State transfer, redshirt senior. Antonio Harmon, the 6'3", 200-pounder, the redshirt junior from Mississippi State. Then you get a legacy player, Tony Martin, 5'10", 175-pound redshirt sophomore from Western Michigan, was heavily recruited out of high school by the Herd, but decided to commit to Western Michigan. Now with the coaching change, we find the Herd Hall of Famer's son coming to Huntington to join the Herd. Xavier Short, the 6'2", 210-pound App State transfer, the redshirt junior, another local tie there. Then you get Ben Turner, 5'9", 175-pound senior from West Liberty, former Spring Valley player, another local tie there. Atlee Cowan, 6'2", 185-pound redshirt freshman from the University of Indianapolis. DeAndre Tamarez, a 6', 174-pound redshirt junior from Western Carolina. Then you get another legacy player, Xavion Turner Bradshaw, another guy that was heavily recruited by Marshall out of high school, chose to go to Virginia Tech. Of course, the son of Ahmad Bradshaw, 6', 170-pound redshirt sophomore. I like it. A couple of guys remaining. Adrian Norton, a guy that really, I think, surprised a lot of Herd fans when he hit the portal and then chose to come to Marshall. 6', 190-pound junior, comes from Akron. We'll talk about him and what he did a little bit later when we get into strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that. And then DeMarcus Lacey, the Jacksonville State transfer, 6', 190, the mirror image of Adrian Norton. But he is also a senior. Great portal in class. I feel like I'm telling you, I felt a lot better doing preparation for this episode once I started concentrating on these units and writing them down. Then let's talk about a handful of guys that are also on the roster, high school recruits that came in. A couple of tight ends we're going to talk about, a couple more wide receivers. Let's start tight ends. It's Rhett McGrew, 6'2", 225-pound freshman, comes to us from Hurricane. And then Brandon Hetwer, 6'4", 220-pound freshman. Trio of wide receivers that come in. Sharon Deuce White, 5'8", 170-pound true freshman. Jalen Abercrombie, a 5'11", 185-pound freshman, comes to us from Spring Valley. All-state performer in the state of West Virginia. Nico Weedman, 6'2", 185-pound redshirt freshman, an international player from Stuttgart, Germany. So I don't know what to make of that, but that's pretty cool. I like the international flavor on the Herd roster this year with the specialists and now dipping into the wide receiver room. Russ, do you want to talk about the portal class, or do you want to go straight into projected starters? What do you want to do?
I say we go into projected starters, where this is a combined receiving core. We've got a lot to talk about with all these guys.
Let's do it. I fully expect, let me say right out of the gate, that I expect to see a lot of wide receivers play. Maybe not as many tight ends, but I expect to see a lot of wide receivers play. I featured 3 guys and a couple of tight ends. So I don't know what you did, but whatever.
I did 4 receivers and 2 tight ends, and because at some point we're going to be in a 4 wide receiver set. So that was my thinking on that. Let's just hit them one at a time. I'll go first. I've got Antonio Harmon on the outside.
Yeah, how can you not? The 6'3", 200-pound redshirt junior, SEC talent, tallest wide receiver on the roster from a wide receiver standpoint. How can you not go Antonio Harmon as your, I won't say wide receiver 1, but I'll just say a projected starter. We don't know where these guys will primarily line up right now, but
yeah, you do expect him not to be in the slot with his size. You do expect him to be on the outside with that height and the speed. And like we have talked about before, he was a wide receiver, then went to become a tight end, was going to be a wide receiver last year, ended up not playing all year in the SEC, comes to us now, converted back to that wide receiver that he was going to be last year. It's intriguing to me, Gunter Brewer here, who is now a tight ends coach, but has all the history with wide receivers and everything, and what hands he might have in this passing game, and particularly Antonio Harmon.
Yeah, I just think it's a slam dunk choice for the number 1 wide receiver pick, or whatever you want to say. Yeah. The flexibility there with, what you might need to line up at 2 different positions. Well, I won't say 2 different positions because it's wide receiver and tight end, but you could line up really anywhere on the field is what I'm I'm getting.
And what's to say you can't go into a 3 tight end set, but he's one of the tight ends.
Correct. Yeah. All right, so who you got for your number 2 wide receiver, or the second, whatever?
It's Adrian Short, and I don't know if he'll be inside, outside. Not Short, daggone Norton. Adrian Norton. I couldn't even read my own handwriting here, but Adrian Norton, and I feel like what he did, second team All MAC, and the catches that he had, seems like we're going to have a possession receiver with a chance to get some touchdowns as well. He intrigues me as well as Antonio Harmon. And I think those are the 2 gimmies, I think, that you would have as starting wide receivers.
Yeah, I also have Adrian Norton as one of my top wide receivers, a 6 foot, 190-pound junior from Akron. You mentioned it, second team All MAC performer. He had 831 yards last year and 7 touchdowns. Guess who that outpaced? Our number one wide receiver, Christian Fitzpatrick, right? But the thing that leaps off the page to me is that yards per reception, 19.3 yards per reception for Adrian Norton. This guy balls. And now that's the surprising thing. Like, it's not surprising that you hit the portal after being an All-MAC performer from Akron. No shade to Akron, but they're not anybody that's generally in a contention for winning any type of championship. So that's not surprising. What is surprising is that somebody like that found their way to Huntington and didn't have maybe a more lucrative opportunity. And I'm not going to pretend like I know what the fine print was on this, or if there even is any fine print. But I'm just saying, like, 19.3 yards per reception. I mean, 831 yards, dude. I'll take that in a season where we're rebuilding an entire room.
And his 43 receptions would have by far been the leading receiver in that category as well. So
yeah. Who's your number 3? This is where it's going to get interesting.
I've got DeMarcus Floyd Lacey as that sort of like I don't know if you would say slot, but the thinking back to the Byron days where you had the 3 receivers, he just feels to me like that speedy, elusive kind of guy. As the third receiver. I don't know if that would be the Z from back then when they had XYZ, but that's who I've got.
So here's the interesting thing. I told you before we started that I had 3 written down. I initially had 4, but I don't know. I thought we would shorten the conversation. I erased Lacey as my 4th wide receiver, the 6 foot, 190-pound senior from Jack State, right? You got to love the familiarity with a Rod Smith offense. You know what you have there with that guy. And if you turn into a scenario where you now find Zion Turner on the field, well, now you have a quarterback wide receiver combo that undoubtedly threw, caught balls, whatever, however you want, practice, game, whatever, so you have even more familiarity. And we say it over and over and over and over and over. If you're a senior and you're not going to transfer somewhere and not expect to play a little bit. So DeMarcus Lacey would have been my 4th if I had 4. So I agree with that too. So on that note, who's your 4th?
The other thing that I liked about Lacey is he also ran the ball a lot down there in 2023. So, he's that guy that they could line up to do those end arounds, or the jet sweep and things like that. So that's why I had him. My 4th is Jacoby Baldwin coming from NC State. And I feel like he's an upperclassman. He's very familiar with head coach Tony Gibson, and Gibson probably would not have brought him here as a senior if he did not think that he could be a weapon in the wide receiver room.
Yeah, so very good pick, right? And sound reasoning. Here's where it gets weird with when you're talking about wide receivers and only featuring 4, is like it all depends on what the personnel set is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't feature Jacoby Baldwin. I featured DeAndre. I wonder if it's Tamarez or Tamarez, whichever. I'm sorry, we'll learn it. But here's why. He's a 6 foot, 174-pound redshirt junior, comes to us from Western Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
576 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. Matches to the yard what Fitzpatrick did last year. So we brought in 2 wide receivers that either matched or beat out our production from our number 1 wide receiver last year. And, also has a pretty good yards per reception, 17.45 yards per reception last year. That's 2 guys that have got to have a lot of wiggle and a lot of speed if you can get the ball to them in an open field. Both of them, 6-footers, sub 200-pound guys, and Tamarez is only a $174. But they got numbers. They've got numbers. They've done it. So I don't know how I can argue against proven numbers right here to not round out my top 4, but it could be any of these guys.
An excellent pick. I had, just to mention a couple others for heavy contributors, Deuce White and Ben Turner are both in that same small, undersized, but very fast, very shifty role. Brian Robinson, we mentioned before, will he finally put it all together? He certainly has the talent if he can get the route running, blocking schemes, that sort of thing, and the hands, the hands. I also had Tamarez down, as a heavy contributor, and that's it from the wide receiver room, keeping it separate for the tight ends.
Yeah, this is going to be the easiest part of the discussion because we're going to feature some tight ends, and we've already talked about Toby Payne, and I personally think he's the best tight end in the conference. How is he not your tight end one? He has to be the guy that is going to be on every defensive coordinator's game plan to account for every week as long as he's healthy. The 6'4", 232-pound redshirt junior. He had just 17 catches last year, just 168 yards. But he had 6 touchdowns, which was tied for number 1 in receiving touchdowns on the team. And he's a first-team All Sunbelt Conference preseason pick by Phil Steele. What more can you say about the guy? He's an absolute nightmare and mismatch no matter where you want to line him up and what you want to do. He has a complete game. He blocks well. He runs well. He's elusive at times, and he can break away if he gets in the open field. Toby Payne is an all-star, and we're lucky to have him back on this roster in 2025.
Yeah, I've got him as well. And then second has got to be by default Tracy Stevens. He had a very strong spring in that game. And I've looked for him, whereas last year I felt like he was a big body tight end that would be more your traditional tight end. Mm-hmm. In this up-tempo offense, he had some really good catches and things like that, and looked like he's going to be a lot faster than what I had imagined him playing. So I think that he's going to be a weapon as well that they can utilize, especially on those third and goal, third and short, where you need to have a couple of tight ends out there, and they might be keying over on Toby Payne, and you got to have another guy out there that's got some long wingspan and ability to catch the ball.
Yeah, so take this with what I'm about to say from the standpoint that I am just a fan. I am not a Division I football player, right? But even last year, I thought that Tracy Stevens was a year away. And he might be the guy that is going to benefit the most from a last year to this year leap of guys that are remained on the roster. He might benefit the most in this new style of offense. And he was a very intriguing pickup when he committed to the Herd, but I just felt like he needed one more year, and last year was that year, and now this year he's going to be tasked with being, the alter ego, if you will, to Toby Payne and what he does. He's going to be the counterpart, and oftentimes it takes two. You need to know that if you've got, sometimes it takes more than two, but you need to know if Payne's off the field and Stevens is on the field, you still have a playmaker that you have to account for.
That's right.
I feel like that's where he's at now. He's ready to be that playmaker. It's his time to shine. And it's really, the opportunity is not going to get any better because the room kind of cleared its own way for him to have this opportunity. Kay Conley hit the portal. We thought that duo of Payne and Conley was going to be electric last year, and Conley just wasn't on the field. I feel like he was injured. It's not like he couldn't play. He was pretty good 2 years ago. And some of the other guys just kind of cleared the way and cleared the path for Tracy Stevens to be that counterpart to Toby Payne, and them to get some flexibility on the field and some more creativity in the playbook. And I love short yardage scenarios, goal line scenarios with those guys. I think it's a really cool thing. And I just also can't get past the potential for how Sean Rouse is going to fit in, It's intriguing. I know I use that word a lot, but how are you going to utilize a converted offensive lineman in a tight end position? I'm just intrigued by that. Let's talk about some strengths. How many you got?
I've got 3.
Cool,
My number 1 overall is speed, and we have some quick players, shifty players. We have some good top end speed guys, but Payne has that speed at tight end, I think, is what really separates it. Most teams have speed at wide receiver. We've got a lot of speed at tight end as well. So I think the overall receiving core, you just got to say it's a good strength.
You absolutely stole not only my strength, but the words that I wrote down also. It's speed and shiftiness in the units. And if this offense is going to be a heavy, short to mid range pass game offense, you're going to need that. You're going to need to make people miss because you're not going to be relying on that over the top throw and just outrunning the coverage type thing. So you're going to need guys that are going to be able to make a play in space, make a play in traffic, then be able to make a move and run to daylight, right? And it looks like that this room, especially from the wide receiver point of view, has a number of those guys. And you highlighted some of those when we talk about Norton, Lacey, even Ben Turner, like guys that were they're just quick as a hiccup, right? Like they can
Turner and Deuce White, both in the spring game. Just, I mean, it was like those reverse end arounds and things like that, and they scored from them.
Mm-hmm.
At least White did. I mean, they just seem like they have the shiftiness that you're going to want in this offense, especially if they're doing jet sweeps and double reverse and things like that. I mean, it just seems like they have built the roster from the wide receiver room that they need exactly for the style of offense that they're going to play.
Yeah, it does feel like that. What's your number 2 strength for this unit, for these units?
Number 2 is mismatches. We can talk about Toby Payne being a mismatch all day long, but Harmon, with the size and athletic ability that he's going to have on the outside, I feel like at 6'3", with his size and speed and his ability as a former tight end, that what are you going to have, a 5'11" to 6 foot defensive back on him? I feel like he's a jump ball guy there in the end zone. You can put a linebacker on him. He's going to be too fast for that. If you need to put height on him for something. So I just feel like we've got a lot of mismatches.
Yeah. Along that same line, we do have a lot of mismatches, but I can't move past any farther than just the number 2 strength is Toby Payne's the best tight end in the Sun Belt. That's it. If you've got the best something somewhere on your roster, that's a strength. And I think at this point I've beaten that horse to death, but if you can find me a better tight end, then I'm all ears. But when he's utilized properly and when he's healthy, I'll take him 100 times out of 100 over anybody else because of the completeness of his game. And I think he's going to make the defense account for him on any given play and every given play to then open up things for those shifty, speedy wide receivers that we're going to, and really the running backs. You're going to have to, account for Toby Payne. You just can't put a guy out there and go, he never catches the ball. He's not a factor in the offense. And then he's a guy you absolutely have to account for. Who's your number 3, or what's your number 3?
My number 3 is depth. And, going into this, not this past 2 weeks, but even going into the spring, I kind of felt like that would not be the case. That we might have 1 or 2 wide receivers and that'd be it. But, we kept adding some people, especially picking up Norton. But now that you start to look at it, we have a lot of receivers in these 2 rooms that we feel is going to be a run-heavy offense. And last year, when we were talking about having an air raid, we didn't have a single person catch more than 34 passes. Mm-hmm. But we had 7 non-running backs. So Toby Payne being the lone tight end, 7 non-running backs with at least 15 catches. So 15 to 34 was that range. And I feel like we can easily look up and down this roster and say, well, yeah, that guy could have 15 catches. Yeah, mm-hmm. That guy could have 15 catches. Yeah, that guy could have 15 catches. So I feel that depth is there.
Yeah. It's kind of wild that we never talk about these things beforehand. We go into these blindly, and so often do we match our strengths. And my number 3 strength is, I said we are fairly deep at wide receiver because I just don't know how many guys are ultimately going to play. But if it's 6 guys, I feel really good about those 6. You know what I mean? If it's more than that, then okay. You start to get into some youngsters that are going to have to start to prove themselves a little bit before you can really say, man, we are deep at wide receiver.
Yeah.
But I do feel like we have instant impact freshmen in the wide receiver and tight end rooms. You mentioned Deuce White earlier. I haven't hardly talked about him at all, other than mentioning that he's on the roster. I think he's an instant impact freshman, and I think he's a guy that not only is going to raise some eyebrows amongst Herd fans, I think he's going to raise eyebrows in the Sun Belt. I think he might make noise on special teams. I think it's just like he might be one of those guys. And then I like the idea of the freshman tight end that comes in from Hurricane, Rhett McGrew, and what he might mean in a passing game situation. In sporadic time, gameplay, sporadic action. If he's thrust into action, has to make some plays. How will he respond? I think he's the type of guy that can be an added weapon as you get through the season, and more guys are playing dinged up and they might need to take an extra play off, but you need a tight end. Like, he could be an instant impact guy in sporadic action. Let's talk about some weaknesses, though. I only have a couple. I know there are more, because we're gonna talk about the same old stuff, but I didn't want to list it as weaknesses. But what's your number one weakness?
How will we mesh, with the QB and wide receivers? Can somebody develop that rhythm together? And that, to me, is my biggest question mark.
Yeah. I didn't want to write it down, but it's the same kind of thing. It's like it's all new. It's such a turnover, and you do get Toby Payne back, but he's going to have new arms thrown to him, and you've got one wide receiver that's caught a ball returning, and we're talking about, can he put it all together for a senior season? And it's a great question. And again, the number one weakness is the great unknown outside of Toby Payne, because everybody else is going to have to prove it in a Marshall uniform. Even the guys that return are going to have to prove it, because they haven't stepped up and had solid seasons all year long, or they've had moments where they've dropped a big pass when we needed it to move the chains, or we had a drive going and that stalled everything. So outside of Toby Payne, there's not a lot to be like that you can bank on right now going into the season without seeing him play, without anything. They've done it like Adrian Norton made plays at Akron, but I can't bank on that right now. I have to see it for a little while. That's my number one. What's your number two?
Number two for me is relative inexperience at this level. You talked about Tom Rez from Western Carolina, but that wasn't at this level. We talked about Antonio Harmon being such a mismatch and physically gifted and everything. He's not done anything at this level. He didn't play much down there. You've got Ben Turner, had a lot of good stats at West Liberty. That's very much not this level. Mm-hmm. You've got some incoming freshmen that have not played at this level. So really, you're talking about potential, but right now Norton is the only person that has a lot of good experience and results at this level.
Yeah, good points. My number two weakness is that we are undersized at wide receiver. I do think that is by design, but it is still an overall weakness when you can't trot out any one of four guys to play on the outside, or put a couple of twin towers per se on the outside. You got one wide receiver on the roster that's 6'3", and you've got three more guys that are 6'2". Overall, that's not a whole lot of height. Now, yeah, look, if you want to go five wide, you can have Toby Payne and four wide receivers out there that all of them are at least 6'2", but there's not that one 6'4" guy. There's not that big, tall, 6'5" guy that is going to be your 50-50 ball guy. You're going to have to rely on Antonio Harmon to be that 50-50 jump ball guy. Is he capable? Probably so, especially against shorter DBs. But overall, as a unit, there's a lot of 6 foot, 5'11", like 5'8", that kind of stuff. And that's overall an undersized unit. So what do you got number three?
Number three for me is, do we have a dominant wide receiver or wide receiver one when we need it? It kind of feels like Norton kind of fits that mold, but will he be more of that was Akron at Akron's offense. Here, he's not going to get the ball thrown to him 50 sometimes. I feel like he could do it. I feel like there's potential for others here to do it. But do we have one right now that we say, hey, we need to go out and stretch the field. We need 100 some yards a game. Are we going to get it from this? And right now, I don't know.
Yeah. It might feel kind of like it's the same scenario as last year. It's like, who's stepping up this week?
That's right.
Who's the guy this week? Who's the game plan around this week?
That's exactly what I was doing when I did this, because we did not have that dominant guy, last year. We felt like at times we did. And when you reflect on the entire season, 34 catches to lead the room just does not scream dominant in 12 games.
No, and then when we thought that we had that dominant wide receiver one, the game comes along and he, of course we're talking about Fitz, and he's a really exciting player, and there's nothing against him, but he had a really good string going, and we thought, okay, we're on to something, and then disappeared in a game or two, and we're like, what the hell happened here? Like, how did that happen? I have one more weakness that I guess we just got to talk about it, because I singled out wide receivers, so I got to single out tight ends. You're not particularly deep at tight end. You've got Toby Payne, you've got Tracy Stevens that you hope takes a leap this year and becomes a viable tight end weapon or all-around contributor even. But after that, it's a converted offensive lineman and 2 freshmen. So that leaves a lot of question marks. Not even for just the freshmen, but you've got a converted offensive lineman. What the heck does that mean to your pass game? Because primarily that's what people care about. Blocking is another thing, but primarily people want to know what kind of stats are they going to put up in the pass game. That's what I want to know. Yeah. And we feel like we know what Toby's going to do. We feel like we think we might know what Tracy Stevens could do. That's a lot of speculation in one sentence. Outside of that, it is all question marks. We don't know how it's going to fit in, who's going to do what. We have some potential, we think, but do we really? We don't know. Let's move into some questions. What do you think?
Yeah.
Who is your biggest loss from a year ago?
It's Christian Fitzpatrick. He had one more year that he gained back. And even though we kind of felt like if he gained it back, he was going to be gone. He had one more year. And in this offense, you're talking about bringing in a guy with his height, the spectacular catches, the production he had last year, fan favorite kind of guy. Mm-hmm. It was him.
Yeah, it is Fitzpatrick, and that was really upsetting to see him. Herd fans were like cheering on and rooting on that he would get the year back, man. Like, we're pulling for you type thing, and he was, working out in our facilities and staying fit and and it's like, man, that's a bummer. Like, we were in your corner, and you got your year back, and you bolted anyway. Like, that sucks. That's not cool.
I think later the same day. I mean, it was like one day, 2 days, something like that.
So he is the biggest loss, but it's also the biggest bummer for the way that whole scenario played out. But you can't take away the wow factor that he brought. You can't take away like some of that catch at Virginia Tech is going to live for a long time. That was very cool, and it'll just live. Even though he transferred out, that'll go down in herd lore as a really cool play and a really cool moment. Who are you most excited to see in 25?
It's Antonio Harmon, and it's because he comes from the SEC, and he was going to be an SEC wide receiver, and then he got converted to a tight end and never got to go back to being that wide receiver. So that to me was really something that when we signed him, I was instantly excited to see. Only 6'3", not like you said, he's not 6'6", 6'5", but 6'3", former tight end with SEC wide receiver recruiting. Give me him on the outside is something I'm very excited to see.
Okay. Obviously great pick. I personally am most excited to see Adrian Norton because he's an all-MAC performer that put up more yards and more touchdowns than our number one receiver last year. And he's done it. He's done it on the field at the FBS level. There's stats that you can look at. There's plays that you can go find. And he made enough of them to become an all-conference caliber player. And I really can't get past that 19.3 yards per reception. I mean, that would be one thing if it was like 15 catches on the year. Yeah. But it's not. It's enough to rack up 831 yards. I'm most excited to see Adrian Norton and how his game translates to Huntington, West Virginia in a Rod Smith offense. Who's your breakout player?
Toby Payne. And it's not that he needs to break out, but I feel like he's going to break out even more, and especially across the Sun Belt and maybe even nationally, that, you know, he's going to be utilized very well. And I feel like that will be his coming out party. That last year you look and you say, well, he got 6 touchdowns, but he only had 17 receptions. And it seemed like a lot of those were in the second half of the season.
They were.
And just like, what are we doing? We're not utilizing this guy. So to me, I think he is going to break out even more than what he has already broken out.
Yeah. What I can't do is take a guy that I know is dynamic and could have done it last year, but just didn't. And he's a first team preseason All SBC tight end by Phil Steele. Like, I feel like from certain publications, the breakout factor is not there for Toby, but I get what you're saying. And I've also said repeatedly that he could be a 40+ reception tight end this year. He could be a 400-yard guy that has double-digit touchdowns. Wasn't far off from it from a touchdown standpoint last year. But my breakout player, I'm going true freshman. I'm going Deuce White to put the whole freaking conference potentially on notice as a guy that's going to make plays on the offensive side of the ball, potentially on special teams. This kid is fast, and he is really, really good in the open field. I think he has the potential to be an instant impact, like all freshman team type player. I am really, really high on Deuce White.
Let me go back to the breakout thing. You and I both picked Mike Green last year to be the breakout, even though he had already shown, and that's where I'm looking at from Toby Payne. Now, I'm not saying he's going to have the equivalent, which would be like 22 touchdowns, you know, but you get what I'm saying. I think that everybody has already, but there are still people in the conference and everything. And there are people like, well, yeah, Toby Payne's decent, but you know, you take away 3 of those touchdowns last year, you know, and he'd be very pedestrian. I think that he is going to have a very special season, and especially with him sticking around, it's all being a local guy. I think it's just going to all come together for him to break out in a big way.
Yeah. How about an MVP? Who you got?
Right now, I'm going with Adrian Norton, and for everything you said, 19.3 yards. You know, if he falls off and goes down to 15 yards per catch, it's going to be still very productive. You hope that he can have that dependable 40+ receptions, have those touchdowns, and be that receiving threat. He could be wide receiver 1 from the get-go here, and I don't think it would shock anybody. So for me, right now, he's the front runner for being MVP, just because we would throw to the receivers more than we would the tight end.
Yeah, sound reasoning. I'm still going Toby Payne as the MVP because it's not only about pass catching for me, it's also about blocking in this run-heavy offense, and I think he's going to be a vital part of all of that. And the ways that you can utilize him, places that you can line him up, man, you don't have to always line him up at tight end, right? I mean, Toby could run routes out of the slot. You might even put him on an outside route at times because we're going to see some creativity out of Rod Smith, Gunter Brewer, Chansey Stuckey, all these guys putting their heads together to see what they can come up with all of these dynamic wide receivers and tight ends. And it's like, you got to be a kid in a candy store if you're an offensive coach and you got all these guys to deal with. And Toby Payne will largely be lined up in a tight end position. Sometimes he's not going to be. And it's going to be pretty cool to see where he goes. But I just feel like his all-around complete game with what he might be tasked to do and with the blocking and everything almost forces him to have to be the MVP. And if he can stay healthy, I think he's a slam dunk first-team All-Sun Belt Conference tight end. And I just think he's in for a really big season. Give me a couple sleepers or a sleeper.
I do have a couple. Crazy that you said that, and it's Floyd Lacey and Deuce White, and it's because Lacey was a running back before. He was a wide receiver. He comes from that offense, so I think that they are probably going to already know how they can utilize him. Deuce White, I think we saw a glimpse of it at the spring game with the double reverse and him being so shifty and everything you said about him previously. To me, those two have the ability to be noisemakers in this conference. And, I didn't even have them here as most excited to see. I didn't have them as breakout, and I don't have them as MVP. That's why they go down to sleeper.
Yeah, and not surprising. I too have two sleepers, and not surprising, one of them is Deuce White. When you come out of high school, you have not done it at this level, but you are as dynamic, as fast, as shifty, as quick, as all of the things that you can line up. And in a slot position, you can line up to take a jet sweep. You might even be running some plays out of the backfield. Who knows? You have sleeper written all over you, because it's just a matter of time before you then are a breakout player. But I'm also going off the cuff, and I'm going to talk about a player that a lot of people were excited to see commit to the Herd, guy that has done it a little bit at a larger school in a larger conference, and another legacy player. Xavion Turner-Bradshaw, I think, is a sleeper pick that nobody is talking about because of some of these top-end transfers in the room. Norton, Harmon, right? And then you're talking about Toby Payne. These guys are eating up all of the conversation. And when guys like us are also starting to sprinkle in conversations about Deuce White and all that, nobody's talking about Xavion Turner-Bradshaw. And he did it a little bit at Virginia Tech. And I feel like with some opportunities, he can be a guy that can break out for you, be a 20-catch guy, maybe, 250, 300 yards, find the end zone 4 times. That's pretty damn good in a role that, for a team that you've never played for before, especially since we have no idea how much of the offense is going to be centered around the pass game. I have no clue. Let me give you that last final question. Are we better from a receiving unit than we were a year ago?
I say yes. I think that what we lost was a lot of potential that never got to be seen, like Elijah Metcalf being hurt. Tyshawn Chapman, you thought was going to just come in here and until that last game. He didn't even get a touchdown. He got a touchdown in the last game, I think it was, against JMU. But DeMarcus Harris, who came from Kentucky, had 1 reception. Mm-hmm. You just go up and down, and you had 34 and 32 as your number 1 and number 2 receptions in the room. And then it just kind of, it's like 20, 17, 15, 17. I feel like what we were expecting we didn't really get a lot of production out of it with the talent that we had. So I think now we are going to be, and that was in an air raid, by the way, misnomer as it may have been. It was an air raid style, you know, and I think now, even though we're going to be run heavy, I think that we're actually going to have some guys, and we're going to actually put up those yards that we did not have last year. Now we got to replace 27 touchdowns through the air. Mm-hmm. And we may have a lot more on the ground than we have through the air. But I think on the yards, the moving the ball, and especially with the quick, I think this might be more of an quote-unquote air raid that is an air run than we had last year. You know, with the quick passes, getting it out, getting it to guys, getting the ball to guys in space, that sort of thing. I think that we are going to outproduce last year.
So let me make a point to what you were saying. I think a lot of the production was hindered last year early on because of a quarterback controversy, carousel. We couldn't figure out who needed to be playing, that type of thing. So you were a quarter of the way through the season, essentially, before you settled in on a true starter. And that obviously did not bode well for the receiving game. But that being said, doesn't matter, right? I'm asking the question, are we better? And even I think for this particular position group, that's a loaded question, because I don't think that it's a question of are we better or are we worse. I don't think we're going to have to be better than we were last year. So I don't think there's going to be as much emphasis on this pass game to be better than they were last year. I think there are guys on this roster that are absolutely capable and might outpace our leading numbers from a year ago. I have no doubt that if he's healthy for the whole year, Toby Payne's going to put up bigger numbers this year than he did last year. But we brought in, like I said, 2 portal guys that put up bigger or it matched the production numbers of Christian Fitzpatrick, our number 1 wide receiver. And you look at Norton and you look at Tamarez, both those guys put up either equal or better numbers than Fitzpatrick. So on paper, yeah, we're better. But philosophically, I'm not sure we're going to have to be better because I'm putting so much faith in this run game. I'm putting so much faith in how this offense is built that it may not need to rely on downfield passing as much. We already feel pretty strongly that it's going to be built around short passes and intermediate passes. I think what we're going to see is maybe a shit ton of receptions, but not a lot of gaudy yardages. You know, you might see a guy that's 2-3 guys that have 7, 8, 9 catches in a game, but none of them are cracking 100 yards, you know, because it's chain mover type stuff. So I think you're going to be trading something off for something else. But from an effectiveness standpoint, I think this pass game is going to be as effective, if not a little bit more so, than last year. So are we better? Depends on what you're looking at. But if it's overall performance that leads to wins, yeah, I think so.
Well, you have to understand, too, that I'm looking at the whole thing that in this Rod Smith offense, there's going to be a lot of jet sweeps. There's going to be a lot, and a lot of people view those as runs, but they're technically receptions because it's a forward pass. The reverses and things like that are actually going to be runs. But I think that we are going to run a lot with some of these wide receivers. I think that we are going to do jet sweeps with these wide receivers. I think we're going to get the ball to them in play. Last year, we were just over 16 receptions a game, and that was on almost 28 attempts a game. Will we throw 28 times a game? I don't know. If you factor in jet sweeps, would we? Possibly. Do I think that we're just going to sit here and have 10 jet sweeps a game? No, nothing like that. But, I think that we will throw 2 or 3 in a game. I think that we're going to have more production out of this wide receiver room and an underutilized tight end room from last year, which factors heavily in the entire receiving core. I think, yes, 100% we're going to be better because, again, we didn't even start using some of our weapons until the last 5 games of the season.
Yeah, it seemed like some of these guys started to finally get some play when after the meltdown and the back was against the wall and we're like, all right, we've got to use every weapon in the toolbox to try to get these wins. So we're going to incorporate everybody. And I'm not saying that was on purpose. I'm just saying that's kind of what it felt like. Like as long as we were winning and we were in the driver's seat, they were okay doing the same old and using the same old personnel. And then once we had our backs against the wall, needed some help, but also had to keep winning, then you started seeing what felt like more production being targeted towards Toby Payne. He finds the end zone more often, and some of these other guys started stepping up a little bit more. Doc Chapman had a big game late. Chuck Montgomery had a big game late, like all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't just throw to Fitz and then, Turner run it up the middle and all this kind of stuff. So even Carl Chester had a big game kind of in the middle end of the season. So it was a different guy every week, and it really felt like that's kind of why. Any other thoughts or concerns or notes that you got on this wide receiver room? If not, you know the drill. You can take us out of here.
Yes, whether you see us at the Jack, whether you see us at the Vet, or whether you see us at the Joan, no matter where you see us, we're going to be saying, go Herd.
Go Herd. It's the ThunderCast. Only 2 position groups remain. Who will it be next week? Will it be the DBs? Will it be the quarterbacks? You're going to have to tune in to find out. We'll see you. It's the ThunderCast. Later.